Did you ever know someone who just didn't seem to be able to live within their means? Probably they weren't hard to like, fun, outgoing, optimistic. They liked a good time, up for an adventure. But they could not stop spending. And at a certain point, it isn't fun or charming anymore. They have nice stuff, and there's always something new they're enthusing over. But the credit card bills are mounting up, the monthly minimums are getting to be all they can afford, and with interest accumulating on the carried balance, they're getting to the point where they need to cut back radically right now, or it won't matter what they buy or don't buy, because their past purchases will already have ruined them. Oh sure, you've spoken to them about the problem, gently at first, and then firmly, and they've agreed there's an issue. They probably even said they'll change their ways. Some just toss the line off and head straight back to the mall. Others make tearful confessions, and they swear from now on they'll buy bulk rice and beans, stop taking fancy trips, and no more cool electronic gadgets. But the next thing you know, there they are in some fancy restaurant ordering another round of drinks and enthusing about their latest electronic toy or home renovation. It's not a pretty sight. Now I want you to imagine that after years of futile pestering of a buddy, going further and further into the red with reckless abandon, you finally discover they've gone to a credit counselor. A serious-minded, responsible, sober individual who's given them a proper plan for cutting expenses, consolidating debt, earning more, and getting the monster under control. What a relief. Until you see your friend stumbling from the restaurant into the gadget store, dragging an even bigger debt load, one that makes Jacob Marley's chain look light and fluffy. Okay, this is a friend you're talking about here, so you call up the credit counselor and tell them what you just saw. This is serious business. He's buying again. And the counselor tells you, no problem, we have a solution that'll really fix things. Uh-huh, you say, and he says, yes, we're going to give him a higher credit limit. Ah, what? You're kidding me. No, I'm not. Nor am I kidding that all the supposedly most prudent, least excitable, and fiscally sober people seem to think this is a great plan. Because this is not some imaginary scenario or something I went through personally or with a friend. It's the story of Europe and its government's catastrophic spending and debt habits. In case you spent the last few days doing normal stuff like barbecuing in the fading good weather or trying to convince a bankrupt friend not to put in a swimming pool, I should mention here that Canada's Finance Minister Jim Flaherty earned the predictable praise of the Globe and Mail editorial board for giving a speech on Thursday where he told the Europeans to do, that thing about your debt and banking problem. In the face of endless desperate attempts to patch things up that are completely structurally unsound, the Globe sonorously delivered itself of the opinion that all this putting out of fires one by one, if it continues, is likely to end up costing more than an ambitious plan, one that would consist of some combination of purchases of shaky assets held by banks and a recapitalization of banks by way of public-private partnerships. In short, throw good money after bad. Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney on Saturday went even further. He told the International Monetary Fund the Europeans should boost their bailout fund from 440 billion euros to $1 trillion, so that bad banks could get more money before collapsing, and so could governments up to their euro eyeballs in red ink. Meanwhile, the head of the IMF just told Britain to brace itself for further hits, so that when Italy or Spain goes whoosh, the UK can share the experience. As if Britain could afford to take on new debts now anyway. If you saw somebody at a casino roulette table on a bad losing streak, desperately doubling up on red with money borrowed from the kids' college fund, you'd run in and stop them, right? At least you'd hope so if you were hoping one day to be a member of an international financial stability institution and be praised by the press as a muckety-muck who knew all about these things. So how is it possible that this sort of talk now produces sober nodding of heads around the conference tables of the IMF? Jim Flaherty's advice included, one wants to get ahead of the issue rather than react to a crisis. Great plan, Jim. And Carney told journalists, there is a need for a comprehensive resolution of this issue, the European issue. You ain't fooling, boys. But letting the spendthrift borrow a bit more and rack up bigger debts before facing his problem and tackling it is the exact opposite of what you're suggesting. You would never propose this course of action for a friend. And as Adam Smith said about free trade, what is prudence in the conduct of every private family can scarcely be folly in that of a great kingdom. It's amazing how often that maxim would fix or avoid a public policy problem. It certainly would here. Hey, you European governments, it's time to cancel the cable and start eating lentil stew. Fire your credit counselor, and for the love of money, cut up that credit card. I'm John Robson, and that's the Byline. Joining me now from Washington, D.C. is James Roberts. He's a research fellow for economic freedom and growth with the Heritage Foundation. And I want to just ask you bluntly, isn't these proposals from the Canadian Finance Minister, Governor of the Bank of Canada, for bigger bailouts from the European Union, the IMF, isn't this just good money after bad?
I think it's time to stop the madness. You know, the reports we're reading are that the European Union and the European Central Bank are considering using this European Financial Stability Facility as some kind of a backdoor to start issuing euro bonds. And that's completely contrary to the Heritage Foundation Index of Economic Freedom, where we focus on smaller government, lower taxes, and not too big to fail banks and too big to bail out firms.
Yeah, and it brings up a slightly scary set of words, but Joseph Schumpeter talked about creative destruction, the need to get rid of things that aren't working in order to put assets to more productive uses. It seems to me that the structure of the European welfare state and of the accompanying financial institutions simply isn't working, and the more you prop it up, the more painful the adjustment will be when it comes.
I agree. I think that if Greece has to default, then it's going to have to be let go. And instead of these endless Band-Aids and conditions, if certain banks in France and Germany are going to go belly up because of all the toxic assets, all the so-called AAA sovereign debt they have that is not going to be paid back, but whether it's by Greece or some other country, they'll have to deal with that, with maybe recapitalize them by their governments. But you have to stop this endless bailout. You know, if they asked the German taxpayers and the German voters and others in Northern Europe who have been more prudent, whether they want to continue endless bailouts of Southern Europe, I think the answer would be no. I think that it's time to just let them go and face the music.
Yeah, and if you're Greece and you think to yourselves, we are actually heading for a bit of a smash-up, is it really good sense to pull the Germans down with you so that you don't have prosperous neighbors as you try to rebuild?
No, I mean, I think, you know, you don't want to make them into bitter enemies. You want them to still come as tourists, even if they have to cash in their euros for drachmas or however they're going to work it out at the end of the day. But you don't want to have more demonstrations. You don't want to have the middle class in Greece disaffected, which reports are now that they're going to refuse to pay some of these big taxes that are being basically imposed by Brussels and Frankfurt. So, yeah, I think it's time to just face up to the fact that the euro was a bad idea in that they took in countries that didn't belong there, had no right to be there, such as Greece. Maybe the Northern Euro would be the alternative. I don't know how the Europeans will sort this out, but the euro as it exists now is clearly going to come to an end.
Yeah, and I know some of the Euro dreamers have talked about this and said, well, you see, the real problem is that we don't have a proper European Central Bank and we don't have a European Ministry of Finance that can draw up European budgets and impose European taxation. You know, is it literally possible, if they decide to go in that direction, so that Greece comes under the discipline of a larger European entity?
You know, I don't see how at this point it is. I mean, you know, Katie barred the door. I mean, the horse is out of the barn, you know, so to speak. I mean, they should have thought of that 20 years ago when they were talking about Maastricht and putting together this monetary union, and they didn't. They didn't take the hard choices then to tell Portugal or Greece or even in Italy, look, you've got to stop spending money the way you used to in the good old days of socialism when you had currencies that you could devalue, the lira, the drachma, the escudo. And if you're going to be in the euro, you're going to have to be disciplined. Well, they didn't do that. They didn't have, maybe they have the political courage to do it. Maybe they thought that it would just happen by itself magically. But in any case, it didn't happen. And I think it's too late to make it happen now.
Yeah, and you talk about hard choices. I mean, I don't want to sound like a bleeding heart or a bleeding wallet, but I could see the first time the Greeks said, okay, we realize we have a problem, that you might come up with a loan to tide them over. But at this point, can anybody seriously believe that the Greeks, the population or the government, has the resolve to tackle their problems as long as there's still room on the credit card to take another advance?
You know, the answer is no. I mean, they're now looking at an indebtedness of 200% of gross domestic product in Greece. There's no way they're going to pay that back. And they've lost all these years in Greece where they could have focused on improving their competitiveness, focused on making sure everybody in Greece paid their taxes, making the public sector smaller instead of intrusive and intervening and disincentivizing private investment, which happens a lot, and there are plenty of articles about that. They didn't do all that. And now Greece is going to have to do that on its own, and it's going to have to be somehow outside of the Eurozone. It will still be in the European Union, we hope.
And if you were giving the Greeks frank advice and they were actually listening, would you tell them the welfare state as you've constructed it has to go? Is that part of the deal at this point?
It really is. And I wrote an article for Heritage on a web memo called Flashing Red. This is a sign that the European social welfare state model is collapsing, just at the time when the left in the United States has been embracing it and trying to force it on the American people, of course, which we've been opposed to, because this is the result. This is the end of the road. There is no free lunch. You cannot keep promising people things you can't pay for, and it will not be paid for. As a famous economist, Herb Stein, once said, if something is unsustainable, it will not be sustained. And the Greek, in fact, European social welfare model is not going to be sustained.
Well, it's painful, but it's true, and I'm grateful to you for coming on and talking to us about it. James Roberts, Research Fellow for Economic Freedom and Growth at the Heritage Foundation.